I was staring at my phone in disbelief at 3 in the morning when the Ring alert came through, showing a middle-aged woman in a designer tracksuit attacking my ice sculpture with what appeared to be a garden hoe. The sculpture had taken me 2 full days to carve, a massive recreation of a phoenix rising from flames that stood 7 feet tall in my front yard. I had just finished it yesterday afternoon, and now here was Brenda Patterson, the HOA president of Meadowbrook Estates in Scottsdale, Arizona, hacking away at it like she was trying to murder a block of frozen water. My name is Xavier Novak, and I had moved into this neighborhood 6 months ago after landing a job as a software engineer at a tech startup downtown. The house was perfect, a modern desert contemporary with clean lines and plenty of space for my hobbies. One of those hobbies happened to be ice sculpting, something I had picked up during my college years in Minnesota and never quite let go of, even after moving to the Arizona heat. I had invested in a commercial-grade freezer and specialized equipment to keep pursuing my passion, and I loved creating temporary art pieces that would slowly melt away in the desert sun. The HOA had already sent me 3 violation notices about various ridiculous things. The first was about my mailbox being the wrong shade of bronze. The second complained that I had parked my car in my own driveway facing the wrong direction. The third stated that decorative yard art required prior approval from the board. I had ignored that last one because my ice sculptures were temporary and, in my opinion, not permanent fixtures that needed approval. They lasted maybe 3 days in the Arizona climate before melting completely away. But watching Brenda destroy my work at 3 in the morning was something else entirely. I threw on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, slipped into my sneakers, and headed outside. The February night air was cool, maybe 55 degrees, which was perfect weather for keeping my sculpture intact. I could hear the sound of metal striking ice before I even opened my front door. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted as I stepped onto my front lawn. Brenda jumped back, her hoe still raised above her head. She was breathing heavily, and chunks of ice littered the grass around her feet. My phoenix's left wing was completely destroyed, and she had started working on the body. "This is an unauthorized structure," she said, trying to catch her breath. "I am well within my rights as HOA president to remove code violations. At 3 in the morning, by destroying my property." I held up my phone. "I have you on camera. This is vandalism, Brenda." Her face went pale in the glow of my porch light. She was probably in her late 40s with that specific haircut that seemed to be standard issue for HOA board members everywhere. You know the one. Blonde highlights, asymmetrical bob, the kind that says "I would like to speak to your manager" before you even open your mouth. "That camera is also a violation," she said, recovering quickly. "You did not get approval for external security devices." "That is not even remotely true, and you know it," I replied. "Security cameras are explicitly allowed under Arizona state law, and they override any HOA restrictions. Try again." Brenda lowered the hoe but did not drop it. "This ice sculpture is a violation of community standards." Article 7, Section 3 of the CC and Artiques clearly states that all decorative yard installations must receive written approval from the Architectural Review Committee at least 30 days in advance. "It is frozen water that will be gone in 72 hours, I said. "It is not a permanent installation. By your logic, I would need approval to build a snowman if it ever snowed here." "The CC and Artiques do not make exceptions for temporary structures," Brenda said, her voice taking on that particular tone of someone who has memorized rule books specifically to use them as weapons. And since you refused to remove it after my violation notice yesterday, I am exercising the HOA's right to remedy the situation. At 3 in the morning, with a garden hoe, while I was sleeping. I stepped closer, making sure my phone's camera had a clear view of both her and the destroyed sculpture. Brenda, this is criminal property damage. You just destroyed something that cost me about $200 in materials and 40 hours of work. Send the HOA an invoice, she said dismissively. We will review it at the next board meeting. No, I said firmly. You will pay for this personally because you just committed a crime. The HOA did not authorize you to come to my property in the middle of the night and destroy my belongings. Brenda's eyes narrowed. The HOA gave me full authority to enforce community standards by any means necessary. I have the board's complete support. Then you should have called a lawyer or gone through the proper legal channels, I said. Instead, you committed criminal damage to property. I am calling the police. That finally seemed to shake her confidence. You would not dare. Do you have any idea how much legal trouble you will be in if you continue violating HOA rules? We can fine you. We can put a lien on your house. We can make your life absolutely miserable. And you can go to jail for vandalism, I replied, already dialing 911. Let us see which one of us has more to lose. Brenda stood there for a moment, clearly weighing her options. Then she threw the hoe down on my lawn and stormed off toward her house, which was 4 doors down from mine. You are going to regret this, Xavier, she called over her shoulder. I will make sure you never have a moment of peace in this neighborhood. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. 2 officers, one older with gray hair and a patient expression, and one younger who looked like he was still getting used to the night shift. I showed them the ring footage, the destroyed sculpture, and Brenda's hoe that she had left behind on my lawn. The older officer, whose nameplate read Martinez, watched the video twice. That is pretty clear-cut vandalism, Officer Martinez said. Do you want to press charges? Absolutely, I replied. She has been harassing me since I moved in, and this crosses a serious line. The younger officer, Rodriguez, was examining the remains of my sculpture with a flashlight. This is really good work. What was it supposed to be? A phoenix, I said. Took me about 40 hours to carve. That is dedication, he said, especially knowing it is going to melt. That is kind of the point, I explained. The impermanence is part of the art, but I would prefer it melted naturally rather than being beaten to death with a garden tool. Officer Martinez nodded. We will need to speak with Miss Patterson. Is she the one who lives in the house with the rocks painted white in the front yard? That is her, I confirmed. Be right back, Martinez said, and both officers headed down the street toward Brenda's house. I waited on my front porch, looking at the destroyed sculpture. The phoenix's body was still mostly intact, but without the left wing and with significant damage to the base, the whole thing looked lopsided and broken. I could probably salvage it and turn it into something else, but the original vision was ruined. I found myself getting angrier the more I looked at it. This was not just about the sculpture or the money or the time. It was about someone thinking they had the right to come onto my property in the middle of the night and destroy something I had created. The officers were gone for about 20 minutes. When they came back, Brenda was walking between them, now dressed in a bathrobe and slippers. She looked furious. This is harassment, she was saying loudly. I am the president of the homeowners association. I was performing my duties. Madam, destroying someone's property is not a legitimate HOA duty, Officer Martinez said patiently. Mr. Novak is pressing charges for criminal damage to property. I want to press charges against him for violating community standards, Brenda shot back. That is a civil matter for the courts, Martinez replied. What you did tonight is criminal. There is a difference. They stopped in front of my house. Brenda glared at me with such intensity that I actually took a step back. You are going to ruin your life over a block of ice, she hissed. You ruined a block of ice over what exactly? I countered. Your need for control. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat. Miss Patterson, we are going to issue you a citation for criminal damage to property. You will receive a court date in the mail. The judge will determine the final outcome, but you are looking at a possible fine and restitution. This is insane, Brenda said. I am calling my lawyer first thing in the morning. That is your right, Officer Martinez said. In the meantime, I would advise you to stay away from Mr. Novak's property. If there are any further HOA issues, handle them through the proper legal channels. After the officers left, I stayed outside for a while longer, just looking at the destroyed sculpture. A few of my neighbors' lights had turned on during the commotion, and I could see curtains moving as people tried to figure out what was happening. I wondered how many of them had their own Brenda Patterson stories, their own experiences with her authoritarian approach to neighborhood management. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. Most were from numbers I did not recognize, but 3 were from my next-door neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Chen who had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years. I called her back first. Xavier, oh my goodness, Margaret said as soon as she answered. I heard about what happened last night. Are you okay? I am fine, I said. Annoyed, but fine. Brenda has been texting the entire neighborhood, Margaret said. She is telling everyone you assaulted her and that she is getting a restraining order against you. I felt my blood pressure spike. She is lying. I have video evidence of exactly what happened. She destroyed my ice sculpture at 3 in the morning and I called the police. I figured as much, Margaret said. Brenda has a history of, well, exaggerating when things do not go her way. Can you send me the video? I think people need to see what actually happened. I sent her the ring footage, and within an hour, Margaret had apparently distributed it to half the neighborhood. My phone started ringing again, but this time, it was neighbors calling to express support and share their own horror stories about the HOA. Apparently, Brenda had fined one family $3,000 because their teenage daughter's car was parked on the street overnight when she came home late from work. She had threatened another neighbor with legal action because his garbage can was visible from the street for approximately 4 hours longer than allowed. She had personally removed flowers from someone's yard because they were not on the approved plant list. Never mind that they were native Arizona wildflowers that required minimal water in a drought-prone state. The stories kept coming, and I started to realize that I was not dealing with just an overzealous HOA president. I was dealing with someone who had been running this neighborhood like a personal fiefdom for years, and nobody had ever really stood up to her, because the cost of fighting an HOA was usually more trouble than it was worth. But vandalism was different. Vandalism was criminal, and I had clear evidence. 3 days later, I received a letter from the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. It informed me that I was being fined $5,000 for the unauthorized ice sculpture, another $1,000 for the Ring camera, and an additional $500 per day, until I removed all non-compliant fixtures from the property. The letter was signed by all 5 board members, including Brenda Patterson. I immediately called a lawyer. His name was James Mitchell, and he specialized in HOA disputes. I had found him through a friend who had dealt with a similar situation in Temp. James listened to my story, watched the video, and laughed. This is the most clear-cut case of HOA overreach I have seen in months, he said. And I see a lot of them. The vandalism makes it even better because it shows a pattern of behavior that goes beyond normal rule enforcement. Can they really fine me $7,000 for an ice sculpture and a security camera? I asked. They can try, James said. But Arizona law is pretty clear about security cameras, and temporary yard decorations are a gray area at best. The real issue is that she destroyed your property. That gives us leverage. We can countersue for the damage to the sculpture, emotional distress, and possibly even get an injunction against the HOA to prevent further harassment. How much is this going to cost me? I asked. I will take it on contingency, James said. If we win, which I think we will, the HOA pays my fees. If we lose, you owe me nothing. But I do not think we are going to lose. Let us do it, I said. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, court filings, and increasingly hostile letters from the HOA. Brenda apparently decided that the best defense was a strong offense, and she started issuing violation notices for everything she could possibly think of. My grass was too long. My house number was not centered correctly on my mailbox. My garden hose was visible from the street. Every single day there was a new notice in my mailbox, and every single day I forwarded it to James. She is building our case for us, James said during one of our phone calls. This is textbook harassment. Keep documenting everything. The criminal case against Brenda was scheduled for early March, about a month after the incident. James advised me to let that play out before we pushed forward with the civil suit, because a criminal conviction would make our case even stronger. The day of the hearing arrived, and I took the morning off work to attend. The courtroom was small, just a magistrate handling misdemeanor cases. Brenda showed up with a lawyer, an older man in an expensive suit who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. I was there with James, even though he was not officially representing me in the criminal case. The prosecutor presented the evidence, which was basically just the Ring video. It was damning. Clear footage of Brenda attacking my sculpture with a garden hoe at 3 in the morning. The prosecutor added context about the HOA dispute, the violation notices, and Brenda's position of authority in the neighborhood. Brenda's lawyer tried to argue that she was acting within her authority as HOA president, and that the violation notices had been ignored. The magistrate, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, cut him off. "Counselor, I do not care if Mr. Novak had built a full-size replica of the Taj Mahal in his front yard," she said. "Your client does not have the legal authority to destroy someone else's property at 3 in the morning. That is what law enforcement and civil courts are for. Your Honor, the Homeowners Association's CC and Articus clearly give the board enforcement powers," the lawyer protested. "Within legal boundaries," the magistrate replied, "which do not include vandalism. Miss Patterson, please stand." Brenda stood, her face tight with barely controlled anger. "I am finding you guilty of criminal damage to property," the magistrate said. "I am sentencing you to 40 hours of community service and ordering you to pay restitution to Mr. Novak in the amount of $200 for materials, plus the court finds an additional $2,000 for the value of his labor. You will also pay court costs. You understand?" "This is ridiculous," Brenda said. "I was doing my job." "Your job does not include criminal activity," the magistrate said sharply. "If you continue to believe it does, you will find yourself back in this courtroom facing more serious charges. Do I make myself clear?" Brenda did not respond, and her lawyer quickly said, "Yes, Your Honor, crystal clear." As we left the courtroom, Brenda shot me a look that could have melted steel. "This is not over," she said quietly as she passed me in the hallway. "Actually, it kind of is," James said cheerfully. And if you keep harassing my client, we will be back here for a restraining order. Have a nice day." I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The day after the hearing, I came home from work to find that someone had dumped a truckload of gravel in my driveway, completely blocking access to my garage. There was no note, no explanation, just about 3 cubic yards of crushed rock piled high enough that I could not even open my garage door. I called the police again. Officer Martinez showed up, took one look at the situation, and sighed. "Let me guess, HOA. Who else?" I said. "You have cameras covering the driveway." I pulled up the footage on my phone. Sure enough, at around 2 in the afternoon, a landscaping truck had pulled up and dumped the gravel. The video was not quite clear enough to identify the driver, but the company name on the side of the truck was visible. Desert Bloom Landscaping. Martinez made some calls. It turned out Desert Bloom was on retainer with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA for common area maintenance. They had received a work order that morning to deliver gravel to my address. The work order was signed by Brenda Patterson. "This is getting out of hand," Martinez said. "Have you considered a restraining order?" My lawyer mentioned it, I said. "I was hoping the criminal conviction would be enough to make her back off." "Some people do not back off," Martinez said. "They escalate. I think Miss Patterson might be one of those people." He was right. Over the next week, things got worse. Someone slashed 2 of my tires while my car was parked in my driveway overnight. My water was shut off one afternoon because someone called the city claiming I was a tenant who had not paid my bill. I received a notice from a collections agency for HOA dues that I had already paid. My mailbox was ripped out of the ground and thrown into the street. I documented everything, every single incident, every piece of evidence. James filed for an injunction and a restraining order against Brenda personally, and we prepared to file a larger civil suit against both her and the HOA board for harassment and violation of my property rights. The hearing for the restraining order was set for mid-March. In the meantime, I had to deal with the daily stress of wondering what would happen next. I started parking my car in my garage, even though that meant spending an entire Saturday shoveling out all the gravel that had been dumped in my driveway. I pointed my Ring cameras in every direction to cover every angle of my property. I even installed motion sensor lights that would turn my entire front yard into a stadium if anyone came near the house at night. Margaret from next door started keeping an eye on things too. She was retired and home most of the day, and she made a point of watching for any suspicious activity. She caught someone trying to put another violation notice on my door one afternoon and chased them off with some very creative language that I would not have expected from a retired school teacher. "I have dealt with Brenda for 15 years, Margaret told me afterward. "I have never liked her, but I never thought she was actually dangerous. This is different. She is obsessed with you." "I just want to live in my house and make ice sculptures in peace," I said. "Is that really too much to ask?" "Not at all," Margaret said. "But you poked the bear. You stood up to her and she cannot handle it. People like Brenda, their entire identity is wrapped up in their little bit of power. When someone challenges that, they lose their minds." The restraining order hearing was more dramatic than I expected. Brenda showed up with the same lawyer and a binder full of documentation about my supposed HOA violations. James had an even larger binder full of evidence of her harassment, including the gravel incident, the slashed tires, the false water shutoff, and about 30 separate violation notices issued in the span of 4 weeks. The judge, a different one this time, listened to both sides and reviewed the evidence. Brenda's lawyer tried to paint me as a problem resident who refused to follow the rules, but the sheer volume of petty complaints made it clear that this was harassment rather than legitimate rule enforcement. "Miss Patterson," the judge said, "I am looking at violation notices about grass length, garden hoses, mailbox alignment, and," he paused, flipping through papers, "the color of your client's welcome mat. The CC and Arcticus specify neutral earth tones for all visible outdoor decor," Brenda's lawyer said. "Mr. Novak's mat is burgundy." "It is a welcome mat," the judge said flatly. "Miss Patterson, do you understand that your behavior has crossed the line from HOA enforcement into obsessive harassment?" "I am simply doing my job," Brenda said. "If Mr. Novak would follow the rules like everyone else, none of this would be necessary." "Everyone else is not following the rules," James interjected. "If they were, Miss Patterson would have to issue about 300 violation notices per day just to keep up. She is specifically targeting my client because he had the audacity to call the police when she vandalized his property." The judge granted the restraining order. Brenda was required to stay at least 100 yards away from me, my home, and my vehicle. She was prohibited from contacting me directly or through third parties. She was also prohibited from issuing any further HOA violation notices to me personally, though the HOA board as a whole could still do so through proper channels. "If you violate this order, Miss Patterson, you will be arrested," the judge said. "Do you understand?" Brenda nodded stiffly, her face red with humiliation and rage. As we left the courthouse, James put a hand on my shoulder. "Now we sue," he said. "The civil suit we filed was comprehensive. We sued Brenda personally for the vandalism, harassment, and emotional distress. We sued the HOA board for failing to supervise Brenda and for rubber stamping her harassment campaign. We asked for compensatory damages, punitive damages, attorney fees, and an injunction preventing the HOA from issuing frivolous violation notices in the future." The lawsuit made the local news. A reporter from the Arizona Republic called me and asked if I would be willing to be interviewed about HOA abuse in Arizona. I agreed, and the resulting article painted a picture of an organization that had gone from neighborhood improvement to neighborhood tyranny. The article mentioned me by name and included the ring footage of Brenda destroying my ice sculpture, which apparently went viral on local social media. Suddenly, I was getting calls from other Meadowbrook Estates residents who wanted to join the lawsuit. James suggested we turn it into a class action, and within 2 weeks, we had 12 other homeowners willing to testify about Brenda's abusive enforcement tactics. There was the family who had been fined for their daughter's car, the man whose flowers had been removed, a single mother who had been cited for having a basketball hoop in her driveway, and a retired veteran who had been threatened with foreclosure because he painted his front door the wrong shade of brown. The stories were infuriating, and they painted a picture of an HOA that had become a vehicle for one person's control issues rather than a legitimate community organization. The HOA's insurance company got involved at that point. They sent their own lawyers, and those lawyers took one look at the evidence and strongly advised the HOA board to settle. The board, minus Brenda, apparently took that advice seriously. They called an emergency meeting and invited me to attend. The meeting was in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance. When I arrived with James, all 4 of the other board members were there: Tom Henderson, Susan Wright, Patricia Ellis, and David Kim. Brenda was noticeably absent. "Mr. Novak," Tom said, standing to shake my hand. He was a portly man in his 50s with thinning hair and a nervous smile. "Thank you for coming. We wanted to speak with you before this situation gets any further out of hand." "I am listening," I said, taking a seat. The board has reviewed everything that has happened over the past few months, Susan said. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with dark hair and a professional demeanor. We have come to realize that Brenda has been acting outside the scope of her authority and has created significant legal liability for the HOA. That is putting it mildly, James said. We are prepared to offer a settlement, Tom continued. We will drop all pending fines and violation notices against you. We will pay your attorney fees to date. We will also make a formal apology and ensure that Brenda Patterson is removed from the board. What about the other homeowners? I asked. The ones who have been harassed for years. The board members exchanged glances. Patricia, an elderly woman with white hair and kind eyes, spoke up. We are prepared to review all violation notices issued in the past 2 years and dismiss any that appear to be excessive or unwarranted. We will also implement new oversight procedures to prevent this from happening in the future. And Brenda, I asked. We have already initiated the process to remove her as president, David said. He was the youngest board member, probably in his late 30s, and he looked exhausted. We need a majority vote of the board, which we have, and then we need to hold a special election for residents to confirm the removal. That takes about 30 days, but it is happening. James leaned over and whispered in my ear, "This is a good offer. If we push forward with the lawsuit, we will probably win more money, but it will take months or years, and there is always some risk. This resolves everything quickly." I thought about it. I had never wanted to be in a legal battle. I just wanted to make my ice sculptures and live my life. But I also thought about Margaret, about the single mother with the basketball hoop, about the veteran with the wrong shade of brown on his door. I want it in writing, I said. All pending and past fines dismissed, not just for me but for everyone involved in the class action. I want the HOA to pay for an independent review of the CC and Articus, to remove or modify any rules that are overly restrictive or unenforceable. And I want a public apology from the board acknowledging that Brenda was acting improperly. Tom nodded slowly. We can do that. And one more thing, I added. I want explicit written permission to continue making ice sculptures in my yard without prior approval, as long as they are temporary and not a safety hazard. Susan smiled slightly. I think we can live with that. James drafted the settlement agreement over the next week, and all parties signed it. The HOA paid him $15,000 for his fees, which was less than he probably could have gotten, but enough that he was satisfied. All fines were dropped, all violation notices were dismissed, and the board issued a formal letter to every resident in Meadowbrook Estates explaining that there had been administrative irregularities in HOA enforcement, and that they were implementing new procedures to ensure fairness and transparency. Brenda did not go quietly. She tried to rally support among some of the residents, claiming that the board had staged a coup and that I was a troublemaker who was going to bring chaos to the neighborhood. She even showed up at my house one evening, standing just outside the 100-yard boundary of the restraining order, shouting about how I had ruined her life. I called the police. Officer Martinez showed up, measured the distance, and determined that she was technically in compliance with the restraining order, but strongly advised her to go home before she did something that would get her arrested. She left, but not before screaming that I would regret this, that karma would come for me, that I had made a powerful enemy. That lady needs therapy, Officer Rodriguez said after she had gone. That lady needs a hobby that is not ruining people's lives, I replied. The special election to remove Brenda from the board was held in early April. It was not even close. Out of 147 homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates, 112 voted to remove her. Only 23 voted to keep her, and those 23 were apparently her personal friends who did not live close enough to experience her enforcement tactics directly. After the election, things finally started to settle down. The new board president, Susan Wright, was a reasonable person who understood that an HOA was supposed to help maintain property values, not terrorize residents. She organized a neighborhood meeting where people could voice concerns about the CC and Articus, and several of the more ridiculous rules were modified or removed entirely. I went back to making ice sculptures. My second one was a dragon coiled around an imaginary tower, wings spread wide. I set it up on a Friday night, and by Saturday morning, I had 3 neighbors standing on my lawn asking if they could take pictures with it. By Sunday, there was a small article in the local section of the newspaper about the guy in Scottsdale who made elaborate ice sculptures in his yard. Margaret brought me cookies one afternoon, homemade chocolate chip, and we sat on my porch watching the dragon slowly melt in the Arizona sun. "You did a good thing," she said. Standing up to her. "A lot of people wanted to, but nobody had the courage." "I just wanted to make art," I said. "I did not want to start a revolution." "Sometimes revolutions start because someone just wants to live their life," Margaret said, "and someone else will not let them." I never saw Brenda again after the election. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband sold their house and moved to Flagstaff. Some people said she was too embarrassed to stay after being removed from the board. Others said her husband was tired of her obsessive behavior and had given her an ultimatum. I did not really care which version was true. I was just glad she was gone. My next sculpture was a mermaid, which I worked on for 3 days straight because the design was so intricate. I placed her in a kiddie pool full of water to slow the melting process, and she lasted almost a week before finally succumbing to the heat. Kids in the neighborhood started asking their parents if they could come see whatever I was working on, and I found myself enjoying the attention. One evening in late April, I was in my garage workshop, planning my next sculpture when someone knocked on the garage door. I opened it to find a woman in her early 30s with dark hair and an uncertain smile. "Hi," she said. "I am Vanessa Ortega. I live over on Seguero Drive, about 3 blocks from here. I hope I am not bothering you." "Not at all," I said. "What can I do for you?" "I saw your sculptures," she said. "The dragon and the mermaid, they are incredible. I am actually a photographer, and I would love to do a photo series of your work if you would be interested. I think the way the ice melts and changes over time would make for some really striking images." I had not expected that. "Sure," I said. "That sounds really cool, actually." We exchanged numbers, and Vanessa started showing up whenever I had a new sculpture ready. She would take hundreds of photos over the course of several days, documenting the way the light changed the appearance of the ice, the way the Arizona sun slowly transformed solid sculptures into abstract puddles. She put together a portfolio and submitted it to a local art gallery, and to my surprise, they wanted to do a show. The show opened in June, right as summer was really starting to hit, and my ice sculpting had to pause because even my best insulation could not keep sculptures intact for more than a few hours in 110-degree heat. The gallery was small in downtown Phoenix, and I did not expect much of a turnout. But the room was packed on opening night, full of people who wanted to see photos of temporary art made from frozen water in the middle of the desert. A local news station sent a reporter, and I ended up doing a live interview about the intersection of art and impermanence, about HOA battles and freedom of expression, about finding beauty in things that do not last. The interview went viral online, not in a huge way, but enough that I started getting emails from people all over the country who had their own HOA horror stories. James called me a few days after the gallery opening. "Did you see the news?" he asked. "About what?" "Brenda Patterson was arrested in Flagstaff," he said. "Apparently, she joined the HOA board at her new condo complex and got into an altercation with another resident. She allegedly keyed the person's car and broke their patio furniture." "Seriously?" I said. "The person had cameras, just like you did," James said. "She is being charged with criminal damage to property again. Some people never learn." I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication because it confirmed that I had been right about her behavior, that it was not just me she had targeted. Sadness because it meant she had not learned anything, had not grown or changed or recognized that her actions were wrong. She was just going to keep doing the same thing over and over, making herself and everyone around her miserable. The summer was quiet. I focused on work, on my photography collaboration with Vanessa, on planning more sculptures for when the weather cooled down. The HOA board continued to function, but in a much more reasonable way. They sent out reminders about keeping yards maintained, about parking regulations, about pool hours. Normal stuff that actually made sense. Nobody tried to fine anyone for welcome mat colors or basketball hoops. In September, when the temperature finally dropped back below 95 degrees, I started sculpting again. My first piece of the new season was another phoenix, a callback to the one that Brenda had destroyed 6 months earlier. But this one was different, bigger and more detailed, with flames that seemed to dance even though they were frozen solid. I set it up on a Friday night, and by Saturday morning, there was a small crowd on my lawn. Neighbors I had never met, families with kids, even a few people from other subdivisions who had heard about the crazy guy who made ice sculptures in Scottsdale. Vanessa was there with her camera, documenting everything. "You know what I love about this," she said, adjusting her lens. "The fact that it will not last. In 3 days, maybe 4, this will be gone, and that makes right now, this moment, more special." She was right. There was something about the temporary nature of ice sculpture that made people appreciate it more. They could not come back next week to see it. They had to be there now in the moment, or they would miss it entirely. Tom Henderson, the new HOA vice president, stopped by that afternoon with his wife. "This is amazing, Xavier," he said. "I owe you an apology. I was on the board when Brenda was doing all that stuff to you, and I should have stood up to her sooner. I should have stopped her." "Why did you not?" I asked. It was not an accusation, just genuine curiosity. Tom sighed. "Because it was easier not to." She was so forceful, so convinced she was right about everything. And the few times any of us tried to push back, she would make our lives hell too. It was easier to just let her do what she wanted and tell ourselves we were maintaining property values. "But you did eventually stand up," I said. "Better late than never." "Only because you forced the issue," Tom said. "If you had not called the police that night, if you had not pressed charges, she would still be terrorizing everyone. So thank you. Really. You did something most of us did not have the courage to do." As fall turned to winter, I kept making sculptures. A castle with turrets and flags. A life-size horse rearing up on its hind legs. An abstract piece that was supposed to represent the flow of water but ended up looking more like a frozen explosion. Each one brought more people to my lawn, more photos, more conversations with neighbors I had never spoken to before. The neighborhood felt different now. People were friendlier, more relaxed. It was like Brenda's removal had lifted some invisible weight off everyone's shoulders, and we could all finally breathe. The HOA still existed, still had rules, but they were enforced reasonably, and with common sense rather than with vindictiveness and pettiness. In December, I decided to do something special for the holidays. I spent 5 days carving a nativity scene, complete with Mary, Joseph, baby Jesus, 3 wise men, a few shepherds, and even some animals. It was my most ambitious project yet, multiple pieces arranged in a tableau that took up most of my front yard. I added colored lights behind some of the figures to create a glow effect, and the result was stunning. The local news came back to do another story, this time focusing on unusual holiday decorations. The reporter, a cheerful woman named Lisa, interviewed me about why I chose to do this in ice rather than traditional decorations. "Because it is a reminder that nothing lasts forever," I said. "The holidays come and go. The moments we have with the people we love are temporary. We should appreciate them while we can because, like ice in the desert, they will not be here forever." The interview ended up being part of a longer segment about unique holiday traditions, and my front yard became something of a local attraction. People drove from all over the Phoenix metro area to see the ice nativity, and I found myself playing impromptu tour guide, explaining how I carved each piece and how long it would last. On Christmas Eve, as families gathered around my frozen nativity scene taking photos and marveling at the details, Margaret came over with a thermos of hot chocolate and 2 mugs. "You have given this neighborhood something special," she said as we stood on my porch watching the crowd. "Not just the sculptures, but hope. You showed everyone that it is possible to stand up to bullies, even when those bullies have authority. You reminded people that neighborhoods are supposed to be communities, not prisons." "I just wanted to make art," I said, repeating what had become my standard response. "And you did," Margaret said, "but you also did so much more." The nativity scene lasted until December 28th when an unexpected warm spell pushed temperatures into the high 70s. I watched as the figures slowly melted, details blurring and softening until they were just abstract shapes and finally just puddles. By the evening, there was nothing left but wet grass and empty space where the scene had been, but that was okay. That was the point. The impermanence was what made it beautiful. In January, I got a call from a lawyer representing the HOA's insurance company. They wanted to do a final settlement for the class action lawsuit, which was still technically pending even though I had settled my individual claims. The insurance company was offering $100,000 to be divided among the 12 homeowners who had joined the lawsuit, plus an agreement to pay for an independent audit of HOA practices and implementation of new oversight procedures. I called James, who called the other homeowners, and everyone agreed to accept. The money was nice, though after legal fees and dividing it 12 ways, it was not life-changing. But the real victory was the audit and the new procedures. The HOA would now be required to have multiple board members review any violation notice before it could be issued. Residents would have a formal appeals process, and there would be annual meetings where homeowners could vote on any proposed changes to the CC and RTCS. The lawsuit was officially dismissed in February, almost exactly 1 year after Brenda had attacked my first phoenix sculpture. I marked the anniversary by carving another phoenix, this one rising from a base made to look like flames. I added red food coloring to the ice for the flames, creating a dramatic effect that photographs could not quite capture, but that looked incredible in person. Vanessa's photo series from the past year was accepted into a regional art competition, and she won 2nd place. She split the prize money with me, even though I told her she did not have to. "You made the art," she said. "I just documented it." "You made it mean something," I replied. "There is a difference. In March, I attended my first HOA board meeting since the whole mess began. Susan Wright was running things efficiently, covering maintenance issues, budget concerns, and upcoming neighborhood events. At the end of the meeting, she asked if anyone had new business to discuss. I raised my hand. "I would like to propose an amendment to the CC and Artiques," I said. "I want to add language explicitly allowing temporary art installations in front yards, as long as they are not safety hazards and are removed within a reasonable time frame." There was some discussion, some back and forth about what constituted temporary and reasonable, but ultimately the board agreed to put it to a vote at the next general membership meeting. When that vote happened in April, it passed by a wide margin. Apparently, a lot of people liked the idea of having the freedom to express themselves without fear of fines and harassment. I kept making sculptures, each one different from the last. A sea turtle, a sailboat, an abstract representation of music that looked like frozen sound waves. Each one melted away in the Arizona sun, and each one was replaced by something new. People started bringing their kids to watch me work, and I found myself teaching impromptu lessons about patience, about planning, about accepting that your art will not last forever and finding peace with that. One day in May, I was working on a sculpture of a tree with intricate branches when a car pulled up that I did not recognize. A man in his 60s got out, wearing a polo shirt and khakis, and walked over to where I was working. "Xavier Novak?" he asked. "That is me," I said, not stopping my work. "My name is Richard Torres," he said. "I am the president of the Arizona HOA Management Association. I wanted to meet the man who has become something of a legend in our community." I stopped carving and looked at him. "Legend? I am just a guy who makes ice sculptures." Richard smiled. "You are the guy who stood up to an abusive HOA president and won. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Most people just give up. They pay the fines, or they sell their houses and move, or they just live with the harassment. You fought back and you won, and you forced systemic change." "That is huge." "I had good legal help," I said, "and clear evidence." "And courage," Richard added. "Look, I am here because our association wants to use your case as an example in our training programs. We want to teach HOA board members about the limits of their authority, about the difference between legitimate rule enforcement and harassment. Would you be willing to speak at our annual conference this summer?" I thought about it. Public speaking was not really my thing, but if I could help prevent other people from going through what I went through, maybe it was worth it. "Sure," I said. "I can do that." The conference was in August at a hotel in Tempe. There were about 300 HOA board members and property managers in attendance, and I gave a 30-minute talk about my experience. I showed the Ring video of Brenda destroying my sculpture, talked about the harassment that followed, explained how I had fought back through both criminal and civil channels. The response was overwhelming. During the Q&A session, dozens of hands shot up. People wanted to know about Ring cameras, about legal strategies, about how to recognize when enforcement had crossed the line into harassment. One woman in the front row stood up and said she had been on her HOA board for 10 years and realized she had been doing things wrong the entire time. "I thought being strict was the same as being effective," she said. "I thought if we just enforced every rule exactly as written, we would have a perfect neighborhood. I never considered that I might be making people miserable." After the conference, I received emails from HOA board members all over Arizona and even a few from other states. They wanted advice, wanted to share their own stories, wanted to know how to create communities that were welcoming rather than oppressive. I answered what I could and referred people to James for the legal questions I could not handle. by the time September rolled around and the weather started to cool, I realized that the ice sculpture vandalism incident had changed my life in ways I never could have anticipated. I had moved to Scottsdale just to have a nice house and pursue my hobbies. Instead, I had ended up becoming an advocate for homeowner rights, a minor celebrity in local art circles, and someone who had actually made a difference in his community. My first sculpture of the new season was a circle of hands, all connected, representing community and mutual support. It was my way of acknowledging that while I had fought the battle, I had not fought it alone. Margaret had supported me, James had represented me, other neighbors had joined the lawsuit, and countless people had validated my experience by sharing their own stories. As I stood back and looked at the finished sculpture, Vanessa showed up with her camera. "This is beautiful," she said. "What are you calling it?" "Together," I said simply. She smiled and started taking photos. The evening light hit the ice just right, making the hands seem to glow from within. Neighbors started gathering, as they always did when I had a new piece ready. Kids ran around on the lawn, parents took photos, elderly couples held hands while admiring the sculpture. This was what a neighborhood was supposed to be, I thought. Not a collection of rules and regulations and violation notices. Not a place where one person could terrorize everyone else from a position of petty authority. But a community where people supported each other, where they could express themselves freely, where they could create something beautiful even if it would not last forever. The sculpture melted over the course of 4 days, as they always did, but while it stood, it brought people together. And that, I realized, was worth more than any permanent structure could ever be, because the real art was not the ice itself. It was the connections it created, the conversations it sparked, the community it helped build. And unlike ice in the Arizona sun, those things did not melt away.